Stepping up, Pearl, Europeans and Canadians buying from the US, essential gear for Ukraine, Europeans stepping up. So we will stick together with a United States anchored more than ever inside NATO, because they know that what they have asked for decades, Europeans and Canada taking more care of the collective defense, particularly spending the same at least as they are spending, is now happening. Not only because the US is asking for it, but also because we need it because of the Russian threat.
General Bridge Colby said that Europe needs to take primary responsibility for its own conventional defence. How quickly does that need to happen? How long does Europe have?
What I am seeing at the moment is NATO more and more European-led. And the Europeans really stepping up to take care of their own defense, but with a strong US presence going forward, both nuclear and conventional. And we have all the plans in place, as you know, to make sure over the coming years, with the huge investments now taking place, as I said, the Germans doubling their defense spending, the new Dutch government committing to reach as fast as possible the 5%, including the 3.5% core defense spending. What is happening in Poland? Well, I could mention all the allies, Canada back, really stepping up. So we will, over the coming years, get more and more, we will more and more see a NATO more European-led, but at the same time, the US absolutely anchored in the organization.
A deadline.
We will do this step by step, in close conjunction with the United States, based on the defense planning process we have. Yes.
Can Putin invite one of the NATO countries?
Again.
Can Putin invite one of the NATO countries, and when it can be?
Well, let me first of all say that there is a US-led peace process. I think that's crucial. And led by the American president, and of course Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. They're doing an excellent job. This is not easy, it will take time. And what you will see, of course, first of all, they always coordinate with NATO allies. So we know what's cooking, what's happening, that's important. Of course, they work closely together with Ukrainians. And wherever helpful, you will see others participate, no doubt. But the most important thing is that whatever happens there, it is in close coordination done.
Secretary General, please. According to the Ukrainian intelligence, Russian ballistic missile Oreshnik is already in Belarus. What NATO are planning to do with this, and will you allow Ukraine to strike this Oreshnik on the territory of Belarus?
Well, again, this is the reason why I'm saying here today and tomorrow, this is my main priority. Yes, it's good news that Europeans and Canada are helping Ukraine more. But we need to do even more, because when it comes to the interceptors, to take out missiles, when it comes to the anti-drones, we need the counter-drone technology. Of course, the Ukrainians having it, but making sure they have access to a massive amount of that as possible, working with the Ukrainian defense industrial base, but also making use of all the cooperation and bilateral cooperation with NATO allies in Europe and Canada, but also making use of this essential gear coming out of the US, including, of course, Pearl, which is interceptors, and everything else we need, lethal and non-lethal, to keep Ukraine in the fight, which only the US can provide, paid for our allies and partners. So all of this is important.
Why you
I have to
want
go.
to talk about courts?
I'm not here to talk about.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und
welcome
Herren, ich begrüße
to the
Sie
62nd
ganz herzlich
Munich
zur
Security Conference.
62.
And
Münchner
let me try to start this on a
Sicherheitskonferenz.
somewhat lighter note.
Ich möchte
I think what
etwas
happened
leichteren
in
Tonfall
Davos a couple of weeks
anfangen.
ago
Was vor einigen Wochen in Davos passiert ist,
does not necessarily
muss
need
ja
to stay in
nicht
Davos. So I'm
unbedingt
going
in
to put
Davos
this on
bleiben.
for
Deswegen setze ich das jetzt auf.
on a more serious note.
Jetzt
On a
etwas
very
ernster,
serious note.
sehr viel ernster.
This conference takes place at
Diese
a time
Konferenz findet statt in einer
growing
Zeit, in der die
about global
Sorgen um
security, or I
die
should say,
globale
insecurity.
Sicherheit oder vielmehr ihre
Never before in
Unsicherheit
the more than
immer
60
weiter
years of this
anwachsen.
conference have there
Mehr
been
als
so many
60 Jahre
simultaneous, rather
haben wir jetzt
fundamental
schon
challenges
gesehen und es gab noch nie so viele
and bloody
fundamentale
wars
Herausforderungen und auch sehr blutige
Europe,
Kriege
around
in
Europe
Europa,
and
um
around
Europa
the globe.
und auch auf der ganzen Welt.
A rules-based international
Die
order,
regelbasierte
did it
Weltordnung,
ever exist?
hat die überhaupt jemals existiert?
There
Fragezeichen.
is a reason
Es gibt
our
einen Grund,
Munich Security Report
warum
of this year
unser Münchner
carries the title
Sicherheitsbericht dieses
Under
Jahr
Destruction.
den Titel trägt Under
Ladies and
Destruction,
gentlemen,
also im Abriss
the
begriffen.
transatlantic relationship
Meine Damen und
in
Herren,
particular
die transatlantischen
finds
Beziehungen
itself at an
insbesondere
inflection point.
stehen heute an
For the
einem
Munich Security
Scheidepunkt.
Conference, the backbone of which has been the transatlantic relationship. This
Das
poses
Rückgrat der
an
Münchner
unprecedented
Sicherheitskonferenz war
challenge.
ja immer die transatlantische
In this
Partnerschaft. Deswegen ist das für uns eine Herausforderung. Deswegen freut es mich besonders, dass unsere starken transatlantischen Beziehungen auch noch auf beiden Seiten des Atlantiks bestehen. Deswegen möchte ich mit Ihnen eine große Delegation aus den Vereinigten Staaten begrüßen unter Führung von Marco Rubio, und zwar mit Vertretern beider Parteien. Mehr als 40 Vertreter des Kongresses haben wir hier und wir möchten Sie alle ganz herzlich begrüßen. Insbesondere möchte ich begrüßen, dass so viele von Ihnen auch rechtzeitig ihre Flüge bekommen haben, obwohl es doch sehr viel, wie soll ich sagen, wichtige Probleme bei Ihnen zu Hause gab auf dem Capitol Hill in den letzten paar Tagen. Deswegen freuen wir uns umso mehr, dass Sie hier sind. Meine Damen und Herren, eine Sache ist ganz klar. Die transatlantische Partnerschaft braucht ein stärkeres Europa. Europa muss einen festen Standpunkt haben und Europa kann aber nur bestehen, wenn die europäischen Nationen zusammenhalten, und zwar stärker als in der Vergangenheit. Deswegen freue ich mich persönlich ganz besonders, dass ich für das Team der Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz heute so viele und bedeutende Staats- und Regierungsvertreter begrüßen darf. Präsidenten, Staatschef, Verteidigungsminister, Kabinettsmitglieder aus ganz Europa. Ein ganz herzliches Willkommen an alle unsere europäischen Freunde und Partner. Nicht zuletzt geht es hier auch um ganz grundlegende Themen, globale Aspekte der
Cyber, about climate change, about energy and supply chains, about global health, about human rights and other issues reaching far beyond the Euro-Atlantic space. I'm therefore also very happy to offer a warm welcome to leaders from the Asia-Pacific, from the Middle East, from Africa, from Latin America, and certainly to all those who represent countries of what is now being called the Global South. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Munich, this is a time to be serious. This is not a time to mince our words or, as they say, to beat around the bush. We need to be honest about our differences, but we should seek to help organize a constructive transatlantic reset, if that is possible this weekend. In this spirit, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude these brief opening remarks by throwing just a few questions to some of you from a long list which I collected over the last couple of weeks. First, a question to the 27 members of the European Union. What concrete steps are you proposing or are you prepared to take beyond delivering speeches to help create a European Union that is going to be a more respected international actor and more capable of defending our freedom, our values, and our borders? Second, a question to the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Are you 5 fully aware of your obligations under Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? And if so, what exactly are your concrete plans to avoid a foreseeable crash landing, a serious confrontation with the non-nuclear world at the forthcoming NPT review conference in April at the United Nations? Question mark. Third, a question to our American friends. Does the United States of America, does the Trump administration truly believe that it needs allies and partners? And if so, this is what we hope, is Washington actually prepared to treat allies as partners? Question mark. And finally, a question to our Chinese guests. If China wishes to further develop and enhance her relationship with Europe, to what extent is China actually going to be willing to invest in getting Russia to end its aggression and withdraw from Ukraine? Question mark. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my brief remark. It is now my privilege, my honor, to present to you the Minister President of the Free State of Bavaria, President Söder. Before he speaks, let me remind those of you who do not speak German that you might wish to put on your earphones, because both Minister President Söder and the German Chancellor, who will be introduced right after that, will, as I understand, use the German language. So be prepared for that. Herr Ministerpräsident, Sie haben das Wort. Thank you.
Herr Botschafter, vielen Dank übrigens an den gesamten Team der Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz, dass Sie uns wieder diese großartige Konferenz vorbereiten. Das ist eine ganzjährige, ganz schwierige Arbeit und ich danke Ihnen ganz persönlich und dem ganzen Team für die hervorragende Vorbereitung. Herzlichen Dank. Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, Herr Bundeskanzler, ein herzliches Willkommen in Bayern erneut. A warm welcome to Bavaria. You can use the German language, the Bavarian language. I speak flawless German, by the way. We have been home to the Munich Security Conference for over 60 years, and it is the biggest conference, Munich Security Conference of all times. 115 countries, 60 heads of states and conference, 16 foreign ministers, 25 defense ministers, many generals, admirals, diplomats, and others, and many representatives of industry. We are pleased to have you in Germany and Bavaria. Bavaria is an excellent location in Germany, and that is true for Munich. We would be the 5th largest economy of Europe. We export a lot, and we are a close partner to the US. We have the largest troops exercise round Waffen and many American companies have their seats here. We export a lot. We are a high-tech hub, particularly for defense, air and space. And a lot has happened here over the last weeks as well. And all this makes Bavaria a great place for this important conference, this speed dating of international policy, if you will. One of these questions that Mr. Ischinger mentioned rings particularly important to me. What about the relationship between the US and Europe? It would have been unthinkable to even have to consider this at one of these conferences. For me, it has always been a certainty that the US has a very clear course. They stand firmly with Europe and Germany. And in these days, this certainty is being challenged because challenges have been shifting. Everybody's trying to end the atrocious war in Ukraine, but that does not seem to be happening. And many Germans feel this uncertainty. What about the US? What about the transatlantic band? Could we maybe live without it? Well, I can honestly say that I cannot imagine a world without this transatlantic bond. Economically, militarily, in terms of our secret services and so on. The Warsaw Pact was just a military alliance, but NATO is an alliance of values as well. And these values of free and liberal democracies are what brought us together, and these are values that we must defend, because they are not a mere relic of the past, but they are important for the future, and we strive to defend these values of freedom, democracy and human rights all around the globe.
Ich bin dem Bundeskanzler sehr dankbar, dass es ihm immer wieder gelingt, gerade mit den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika Dinge voranzubringen. Er wird uns das jetzt gleich sehr ausführlich dann sicher beschreiben. Nur aus meiner Sicht ist klar, wir wollen Freunde sein, wir wollen Partner sein, aber nicht Untergebene. Es hat uns schon sehr gewundert, und ich darf das sagen, als bayerischer Ministerpräsident auch ein Stück weit verletzt, dass der Einsatz, den viele NATO-Länder gebracht haben in Afghanistan, wo viele auch mit Leben bezahlt haben, auch wir in Bayern, dass das zu wenig gewürdigt wurde. Wir haben unseren Beitrag in der schwierigsten Stunde der Vereinigten Staaten damals erbracht. Es hat viel Leben auch gekostet. Deswegen finde ich, wäre es angemessen, dies auch einmal zu würdigen, was unsere Soldatinnen und Soldaten dort auch in Afghanistan gemeinsam geleistet haben.
To respect the sacrifice that our forces made in Afghanistan.
Also, wackelt die Beziehung? Gibt es eine Beziehungsdelle? Ist es eine Beziehungskrise? Es war schon mal warm und herzlich. Ich glaube, das kann man sagen. Soll das jetzt weiter so gehen? Oder versuchen wir einfach nochmal einen neuen Weg zu finden? Meine Überzeugung, ja, wir Europäer haben unseren Beitrag zu leisten. Kommissionspräsidentin arbeitet sehr hart dafür, Europa stärker zu machen, wirtschaftlich, militärisch. Wir, Deutschland, wollen einen wichtigen Beitrag dazu leisten. Vielleicht gelingt es uns auch ein bisschen weniger im Klein-Klein, weniger Bürokratie, mehr Freiheit, Technik und Kraft zu etablieren. Das ist der eine Teil.
freer
Der andere
and
Teil,
therefore a bit stronger.
meiner
That's
Überzeugung
one
nach
part
werden
of
wir
the
es nicht
puzzle.
alleine schaffen,
But
aber
what's the
ich
other
glaube auch
part?
nicht, dass
I
die
don't think we
Amerikaner
can go
auf
it
Dauer
alone.
ohne die Europäer
But I
wirklich glücklich
also
wären.
believe that
Es
the
gibt immer wieder in
Americans will
Beziehungskrisen
be
so
happy
Momente, wo der
without
eine überlegt nach einer
the
langen Beziehung,
Europeans in the long run.
vielleicht ziehe ich aus
You
und
know,
fange ein neues
sometimes you
Leben
have a
an.
crisis in your relationship
nach
and
einer
you think
gewissen
maybe
Zeit
I'll
kommt er
move
dann wieder
out and I'll
zurück,
start
weil
over.
es doch
But
besser war.
often
Vielleicht
after some
versuchen wir
time you
einen
come
Deal.
back because you miss what you had.
Wir werden
So
besser.
maybe we can strike a
Ihr
deal.
werdet freundlicher.
Maybe we can become a little
Wir
better. You
akzeptieren
can
nach wie
become
vor
a little
eure Führung,
friendlier. We will
aber ein bisschen
accept
mit
your
mehr Respekt,
leadership.
mit mehr
But maybe you pay us
Wertschätzung
some more
und
respect,
nehmt auch unsere
a little
Interessen
more
als das ist, was
appreciation,
es ist, wahr,
and maybe
nämlich
you
als
can recognize our
akzeptabel und
interest
richtig.
as
Ich bin
what
ein Kind
they are,
dieser
which is
deutsch-amerikanischen Beziehung, bin
understandable.
aufgewachsen neben einem Hospital der Streitkräfte. Seit meiner
grew
Jugend
up
an fühle ich mich
next
dem
to a
verbunden.
hospital of the
Ich
US
möchte das eigentlich
forces,
nicht
and
ändern.
I've always
Ich
felt
will mit
very, very
gutem Gewissen
close
weiter sagen,
to
dass
the
natürlich das
Americans.
beste Lieblingsgetränk ein
And
Weißbier ist, aber
of
im
course,
Zweifelsfall
I
dann
want
doch
to
lieber
keep saying
Whisky
that
als
I
Wodka.
love Bavarian
Herzlich willkommen
beer.
hier bei der
That's
Sicherheitskonferenz gemeinsam.
my favorite, but if in doubt, I prefer whiskey to vodka. A warm welcome to the Munich Security Conference.
Meine Damen und Herren, da auch der nächste Redner seine Präsentation in deutscher Sprache halten wird, bleibe ich jetzt auch für diese 30 Sekunden in Deutsch. Ich freue mich sehr als Organisator dieser Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz, dass Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz entschieden hat, nicht wie seine Vorgänger erst am zweiten Tag der Konferenz zu sprechen, sondern heute Nachmittag, nämlich jetzt, diese Konferenz zu eröffnen und damit, davon gehen wir alle aus, damit auch den Ton zu setzen für die nächsten beiden Tage angesichts der bereits beschriebenen schwierigen Fragen, die sich im Augenblick für uns, für die europäische und für die transatlantische, ja für die globale Community stellen. Ich will das nicht, will Sie nicht weiter auf die Folter spannen. Ich freue mich sehr, Herr Bundeskanzler, dass Sie in dem ersten Jahr Ihrer Kanzlerschaft jetzt das Wort ergreifen. Sie haben das Wort. Bitte sehr.
Opening the Munich Security Conference. You have the floor.
Sehr geehrter lieber Wolfgang Ischinger, lieber Markus Söder, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen aus den Regierungen, aus den Parlamenten, Exzellenzen, sehr verehrte liebe Gäste, meine Damen und Herren. Ich komme mit einigen Unterbrechungen jetzt seit mehr als 30 Jahren nach München zur Sicherheitskonferenz. Die Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz war schon immer ein Seismograph der politischen Lage. In den Anfangsjahren ein Seismograph für die Beziehungen zwischen Amerika und Europa. Seit vielen Jahren ein Seismograph für die gesamte politische Weltlage. Ich bin in früheren Jahren vor allem hierher gekommen, um die Beziehungen zu unseren amerikanischen Freunden zu pflegen, aber auch um neue Akteure der Außenpolitik und der Sicherheitspolitik aus vielen Ländern der Welt zu treffen. Seit einigen Jahren liegt nun auch hier im Saal eine Stimmung, die geprägt ist von zunehmenden Spannungen und Konflikten in der Welt. Und spätestens mit dem russischen Angriffskrieg gegen die Ukraine vor 4 Jahren sind wir eingetreten in eine neue Phase von offen ausgebrochenen Kriegen und Konflikten, die uns in Atem halten und die unsere Welt tiefgreifender verändern, als wir dies auch hier im Saal über so viele Jahre zuvor für möglich gehalten haben. Vor diesem Hintergrund, lieber Wolfgang Ischinger, war es mir wichtig, die Konferenz heute zu eröffnen. Denn wir müssen miteinander reden. Dringender denn je. Bevor wir das tun, erlauben Sie mir, dass ich namens der Bundesregierung Wolfgang Ischinger dafür danke, dass er in diesem Jahr noch einmal die Konferenzleitung
this
übernommen
conference
hat.
once
Ich darf das so
again this
sagen, lieber
year.
Wolfgang.
I may say this that
Herzlichen
way,
Dank
Wolfgang.
für deine
Thank you very
Arbeit,
much
auch und
for
gerade
your great
in
work,
diesem Jahr.
especially in this year.
Über dieser Konferenz steht ein düsteres Motto.
You've chosen a grim motto
Under
for this conference.
destruction.
Under destruction.
Dieses Motto meint wohl, die
And it probably
internationale
means
Ordnung,
that the
die auf
international
Rechten
order
und auf
based on
Regeln
rights
ruhte,
and rules
ist im Begriff,
is
zerstört zu
currently
werden.
being destroyed.
Ich fürchte,
But I'm afraid
wir müssen es noch
we
etwas
have to
deutlicher
put it
sagen.
in even harsher terms.
Diese Ordnung,
This order,
so unvollkommen
as
sie selbst
flawed
zu ihren
as
besten
it has been
Zeiten
even in
war,
its heyday,
sie gibt es
no
so
longer
nicht mehr.
exists.
Und wir, Europa,
And we,
nun,
Europe,
Europa, so hat es Peter Sloterdijk
Peter
vor
Sloterdijk
einigen Wochen
wrote
geschrieben,
a few weeks ago
hat einen
that Europe
langen Urlaub
had
von der
just
Weltgeschichte
returned
beendet.
from a vacation from world history.
Wir haben gemeinsam die Schwelle in eine
Together,
Zeit überschritten,
we've
die
entered
wieder
an
einmal
era that once again
offen von Macht
is
und vor
marked
allem
by power
Großmachtpolitik
and
geprägt
big
ist.
power politics.
Da
Very
steht
openly.
zuallererst Russlands
First of
gewalttätiger
all, we see
Revisionismus,
Russia's violent
ein
revisionism.
brutaler Krieg
It's
gegen die
brutal
Ukraine,
war against Ukraine,
gegen unsere politische Ordnung,
against our political
mit
order,
täglichen,
with
schwersten
daily
Kriegsverbrechen.
cruel
Aber dies ist
war
nur der
crimes.
grellste Ausdruck,
But this
den
is
wir
only
täglich
the
sehen.
shrillest expression we
Wir
see on a
erleben
daily
andere
basis.
Entwicklungen
We see other
auf der
developments
Welt,
in the
die
world as
anders
well
sind, als wir
that
sie
are
auch hier
different
in diesem Saal
to
in den
what
letzten
we
Jahren
in
und
this room
Jahrzehnten oft besprochen haben.
would have expected
China
or
erhebt
discussed
einen globalen
in the years before. China
Gestaltungsanspruch.
wants to be a
Die
leader in
Grundlagen
shaping the
dafür
world,
hat
and it
China über
has
viele Jahre
paved the ground
mit
for that over
strategischer
many
Geduld
years with
gelegt.
strategic patience.
in absehbarer Zeit
In the foreseeable
könnte
future,
Peking
Beijing
den Vereinigten
could
Staaten militärisch auf Augenhöhe
on an equal footing with the
begegnen.
United States in military
Abhängigkeiten
terms.
anderer nutzt China
China
systematisch aus.
systematically
Und die
uses
internationale
dependencies of
Ordnung
others,
deutet
and
China in
it
seinem Sinne
redefines
neu.
the international order in its own
Wenn es nach dem
favor.
Fall der Berliner Mauer
If
einen
there had been
unipolaren
a unipolar
Moment in der
moment
Geschichte
after the
gegeben
fall of the
hat,
Berlin Wall,
dann ist
a
der lange
unipolar moment in history, it has long
Der
passed.
Führungsanspruch der Vereinigten
The
Staaten
United
jedenfalls
States' claim
ist
to leadership
angefochten,
has been challenged
vielleicht schon
and
verspielt.
possibly lost.
Die Rückbesinnung auf
The
Machtpolitik
return to
erklärt sich
power
aber nicht
politics,
nur
however, is not
aus der
only
Rivalität
rooted in
großer Staaten.
the rivalry between
Meine
great
Damen und Herren,
powers.
sie ist
Ladies
auch
and gentlemen,
Spiegel
it is also a
unruhiger,
reflection of
getriebener
restless,
Gesellschaften in
agitated
Zeiten
societies
großer
in times
Umbrüche.
of revolutionary
Sie
changes.
ist Ausdruck eines
It is an expression
Bedürfnisses,
of
auch in
a
vielen
wish,
demokratischen
also in many
Staaten,
democratic states,
nach starker
a wish for
Führung.
strong leadership
in einer Welt,
in a globalized
in der
world,
gerade
in
demokratisch
which
verfasste
especially
Staaten
democratic
hart an die
states
Grenzen
are
ihrer
coming very
Handlungsfähigkeit
close to the
stoßen.
limits of their ability to act.
Großmachtpolitik
Big power
scheint
politics, it
jedenfalls so,
seems,
gibt da eine starke,
gives
einfache
strong
Antwort.
and easy answers,
Jedenfalls den
at
Großen
least to the big players
und jedenfalls
and at least
zunächst.
at a first glance.
Desillusioniert
With
wendet sich
disillusion,
Großmachtpolitik
big power politics
von einer Welt
turns
ab,
away from a
deren
world
fortschreitende
in
Vernetzung
increasing connectivity
eben in Verrechtlichung und
translates into
Befriedung
the
der
rule of law
Verhältnisse
and
zwischen den
peaceful
Staaten
relations between states.
übersetzt wurde. Großmachtpolitik
Big power
funktioniert nach eigenen
politics
Gesetzen.
has its own rules.
Sie ist schnell
It is fast,
hart
harsh,
und oftmals
and often
unberechenbar.
unpredictable.
Sie fürchtet eigene
It
Abhängigkeiten.
fears own dependencies,
Die Abhängigkeiten anderer aber nutzt sie und
uses
wenn nötig
dependencies of others, and if
nutzt sie
necessary,
aus.
even exploits them.
Ins Zentrum rückt der Kampf um
At the heart of this
Einflusssphären,
stands the battle for
Abhängigkeit
spheres of
und
influence,
Gefolgschaft.
dependencies,
Rohstoffe,
and deference. Natural
Technologien
resources, technologies,
Lieferketten
and supply chains
werden
are
Machtinstrumente
becoming bargaining tools in the
der
zero-sum
Großen.
game of the major
Das
powers.
ist ein gefährliches
This
Spiel.
is a dangerous game.
Zuerst für die Kleinen,
At first, for the small
Später,
players, but later
aber
on,
wahrscheinlich auch
probably
für die Großen.
also for the big players.
Darauf stellen sich unsere
And
Freunde
our
in den
friends
Vereinigten
in the
Staaten mit
United
hohem
States
Tempo ein.
are adapting to
Sie haben
this
den eigenen
at a fast
Nachholbedarf
pace.
gegenüber China
They have
erkannt.
realized their own need to catch up
In
in
ihrer
some areas
nationalen
with China,
Sicherheitsstrategie
and they
ziehen
are
sie radikale
drawing
Konsequenzen.
radical
Sie
consequences
tun das in einer
in their
Weise,
national security strategy.
die den Trend
They
nicht
do that in
bremst.
their own way that does not
sondern eher
slow
noch
down this
beschleunigt.
trend, but rather accelerates
Auch
it.
wir, die
And
Europäer,
we, the Europeans too,
treffen unsere
are
Vorkehrungen.
preparing
Wir treffen unsere Vorkehrungen für diese neue
for
Zeit.
this new era.
Dabei kommen wir zu anderen
And
Ergebnissen
we
als
reach
etwa
different
die Administration
conclusions than, for
in
example, the administration in Washington.
Unsere erste Aufgabe,
Our
unsere
prime
Aufgabe
task
als
as
Europäer und natürlich auch als
Europeans,
Deutsche,
and of course as
ist es
Germans
heute
too,
zunächst einmal,
is
diese neue
to
Realität anzuerkennen.
accept this new reality
Das
today.
bedeutet nicht, dass wir sie als
It
ein
does not mean that
unabänderliches
we accept it as an
Schicksal einfach
inevitable
hinnehmen.
fate.
Wir sind dieser Welt nicht
Are not
ausgeliefert.
at the mercy of this
Wir
world.
können sie
We can
gestalten.
shape it.
Ich habe keinen
And I
Zweifel.
have no doubt
Wir werden in dieser
that
Welt unsere Interessen
we will preserve
und unsere Werte
our interests and our
bewahren.
values in this world
Zumindest dann,
if
wenn wir entschieden,
we
gemeinsam
step up together
mit
with
Selbstvertrauen
determination,
auf die eigene
with
Stärke setzen.
confidence in our own strengths.
So werden wir dem rauen
This
Wind
way we
trotzen
will weather the
und
storm
unsere Freiheit
and
bewahren. Wir werden
preserve our
neue Türen
freedom. We
aufstoßen,
will
neue
push
Chancen
open new doors.
ergreifen.
We will seize new opportunities. And
wenn wir es richtig
if
machen,
we get it right,
sogar gestärkt
we will
aus dieser
emerge
Probe
even stronger
hervorgehen.
from this testing time.
Meine Damen und Herren, ganz
Ladies and
nüchtern.
gentlemen,
Wir sollten
in a
uns
very
zunächst
sober
also
manner, we should
auf unsere Ziele
firstly
und dann
focus
auf unsere
on our
Möglichkeiten besinnen.
objectives and our
Die
possibilities.
großen Ziele deutscher
The
Außen-
major
und
objectives
Sicherheitspolitik
of
ergeben
German
sich
foreign and security policy derive
Grundgesetz,
from our basic law,
aus unserer Geschichte
our history,
und aus unserer
and
Geografie.
our geography.
Und über allem
Above
steht
everything
unsere Freiheit.
stands our freedom.
Unsere Sicherheit
Our security
ermöglicht diese
makes
Freiheit.
this freedom
Unsere
possible.
wirtschaftliche Stärke
Our economic power
dient
serves
dieser Freiheit.
this freedom.
Grundgesetz,
Our basic law,
Geschichte
our history,
und
and our
Geografie
geography
geben uns auf, unsere Ziele
mandate us
immer auch
to always
europäisch zu
think
denken.
our goals in a European
Diese
dimension.
Ausrichtung entspricht unseren
This
Interessen.
focus is in our own vested
Sie
interest.
eröffnet
It opens up
nur so
only this
die
way.
besten
It
Chancen
opens up the best
für unser Land.
opportunities for our country.
Gerade deutsche Außenpolitik
Especially,
und deutsche
particularly German foreign and
Sicherheitspolitik ist
security policy
europäisch
is
verankert.
anchored in a European
dieses Europa
perspective, and this Europe
Ist heute
is
wertvoller
more
denn je.
precious than ever.
Wie wir unsere Ziele verfolgen,
The way we
das bringen wir heute
approach our
mit unseren
goals
eigenen
is something that we adjust
Möglichkeiten
today to the
in Einklang.
possibilities that we have.
Ein offenes Wort.
And let me be very frank
Gemessen
here.
an ihren
Compared
Machtmitteln
to its
hatte die deutsche
power
Außenpolitik der
instruments,
letzten
German foreign policy
Jahrzehnte,
of the last decades
lassen Sie mich das so sagen,
had, if I may
einen
put it that way,
normativen Überschuss.
a normative surplus.
Mit den besten Absichten
With the best
hat sie
intentions,
Verletzungen
it
der internationalen Ordnung in
criticized
aller Welt
violations
kritisiert.
of the international order
Sie hat
all
oft
over the world.
gemahnt,
It has often
gefordert
admonished,
und
demanded,
gemaßregelt.
and scolded.
Aber sie war nicht
But
besorgt
it
genug
was not worried
darüber,
enough about the fact
dass oft die Mittel
that
fehlten,
it often lacked
Abhilfe zu
the
schaffen.
means to solve the problem.
Diese Schere zwischen
This
Anspruch
gap between
und
ambition
Möglichkeiten,
and possibility
sie hat sich zu weit
had
geöffnet.
grown too wide.
Wir schließen sie.
We're closing it now.
Und nur so werden wir
And
der
this way,
Wirklichkeit
we will be in a
besser
better position
gerecht.
to face reality.
Legen wir uns also
So,
damit Rechenschaft ab über
let's
unsere
be
eigenen
honest about
Möglichkeiten.
our own possibilities.
Ein kurzes Schlaglicht.
And one striking
Das
example
Bruttoinlandprodukt
is
Russlands beläuft
Russia's
sich zurzeit auf
GDP
etwa
is
2
currently
Billionen Euro.
about 2 trillion euros.
Das der Europäischen
That of the
Union
European Union
ist fast
is almost
10-mal
10 times
so hoch.
as high.
Und doch ist
But still,
Europa
Europe
heute nicht
is
10-mal
not
so
10
stark.
times as
wie
strong
Russland.
as Russia today.
Unser militärisches,
Our military,
unser politisches,
political,
unser ökonomisches und unser
economic
technologisches
and technological
Potenzial ist
potential
enorm.
is huge.
Aber wir haben es lange noch
But we
nicht im erforderlichen Maße
haven't
ausgeschöpft.
tapped it to the necessary
Wichtigste ist
extent
deshalb
for a
nun
very long
Folgendes.
time.
Wir
So the
legen
most
den
important
Schalter
thing is
im Kopf
to turn the switch in our minds now.
Wir haben begriffen,
We have understood
Ära der Großmächte
that
ist
in
unsere
the era
Freiheit
of big powers, our freedom is no longer a given. It is at stake.
Es wird Festigkeit und
We will
Willenskraft
need
brauchen, diese
to show
Freiheit.
firmness and determination to assert this freedom.
Das wird uns die Bereitschaft
This
zu
will
Aufbruch,
require our willingness to engage in
Veränderung
new
und ja, auch
beginnings,
zu
in
Opfern
change, and yes, also
abverlangen.
make sacrifices.
und zwar nicht eines
Not
Tages,
just someday,
sondern jetzt.
but right now.
Aus gewichtigen Gründen tun wir uns in
And
Deutschland
it is for
nicht
very good
leicht.
reasons that we have our
mit
difficulties in
staatlicher
Germany
Macht.
with state power.
Seit
Since
1945
1945,
ist fest in unserem Denken
it has been
verankert,
deeply enshrined in
wir
our
müssen
thinking
diese
that we
Macht
need to rein in
einhegen.
this power.
Lassen Sie mich
And
hinzufügen,
let me add,
nicht nur zu
it is
viel
not just too
staatliche
much
Macht
state power
zerstört
that
das
destroys the
Fundament
foundation
unserer
of our freedom.
Zu wenig
Too little
staatliche Macht
state power
führt auf anderem
will
Weg
lead you to a different
zum
path,
selben
but to the
Ergebnis.
same result.
Und diese Frage
And
hat
this
eine
question
zutiefst europäische
has a
Dimension.
very much European
Darf ich ihn
dimension.
zitieren? Schon vor 15 Jahren hat Radek
Already
Sikorski
15 years ago,
Deutschland
Radek
ins Stammbuch
Sikorski
geschrieben,
told
ich
us
fürchte deutsche
Germans,
Macht weniger
I fear German power
als
less
deutsche
than
Untätigkeit.
German inactivity.
Auch dies ist Teil
This too
unserer
is
Verantwortung,
part of our
die sich
responsibility,
aus
our responsibility
Grundgesetz,
that rises from
Geschichte
our basic law,
und
our
Geografie
history and
ergibt.
our geography.
Wir nehmen diese
We
Verantwortung
assume
an.
this responsibility.
Dazu brauchen wir eine Strategie,
And we need a strategy
die
for
ein
that,
offenkundiges Dilemma
to solve
auflöst.
an obvious
Die
dilemma.
Neuordnung der
The
Welt durch
restructuring of the
große
world by
Mächte
the big powers
vollzieht
is
sich
happening
schneller
faster
und
and more
tiefgreifender,
comprehensively
als wir uns
than
selbst
we can
stärken
strengthen
können.
ourselves.
Schon deshalb überzeugt
So
es
I'm
mich
not
nicht,
convinced,
denn manchmal
because
allzu
sometimes
reflexhaft danach
people
gerufen wird,
automatically
Europa solle die
demand
Vereinigten
Europe
Staaten als
to
Partner
just
abschreiben.
write off the US as a partner.
Meine Damen und Herren, ich verstehe
Ladies
das
and gentlemen, I
Unwohlsein
understand
und die
the
Zweifel
uneasiness, and I share some of
davon.
them.
Und doch sind diese
But still,
Forderungen
these claims have
nicht zu Ende
not been
gedacht.
fully thought
Sie
through.
blenden harte
They ignore
geopolitische
hard
Realitäten
geopolitical
in
realities
Europa
in
einfach aus.
Europe.
Und sie unterschätzen
And
das
they
Potenzial,
underestimate the
das
potential
unsere
that our
Partnerschaft mit den
partnership
Vereinigten
with the
Staaten bei
US
allen Schwierigkeiten
continues to have,
weiter hat.
despite all the difficulties
Es
that
wird nicht
exist.
genügen, also
It will not suffice
möglichst klug
to simply
auf die
give
Manöver
smart
und Launen der
reactions to the
großen
maneuvers and moods
rhetorisch
of the great
zu
powers
reagieren.
rhetorically.
Wir setzen in dieser
So,
Zeit der Anfechtung
In these
unsere
challenging
eigene Agenda.
times,
Wir
we
besinnen uns
are
auf uns
creating our own
selbst.
agenda. We are focusing on
Diese Agenda
ourselves.
ist im Werden.
This agenda is gradually
auch
being
anders sein?
developed. And how could it be
Und doch ist
otherwise?
ihre Verwirklichung
But still,
in vollem
we're
Gang.
implementing it
Wir
at
nutzen
full
den
speed.
Druck,
We use the
unter den wir
pressure
gekommen
under
sind,
which
um
we've come
Neues
to
und
create
hoffentlich Gutes zu
something
schaffen.
new, something hopefully good.
Großmachtpolitik
Big
in
power
Europa
politics
ist
in
allerdings
Europe, however,
für Deutschland
is
keine Option.
not an option for Germany.
Partnerschaftliche Führung,
Leadership in partnership, yes.
hegemoniale
Hegemonial
Fantasien.
fantasies,
nein.
no.
Nie wieder
Never
werden wir
again
Deutsche
will we
allein
Germans go it alone.
Das ist bleibende Lehre
This
aus
is the
unserer
enduring
Geschichte.
lesson we've learned from our
Unsere
history.
Freiheit
We
behaupten wir
assert
mit unseren
our
Nachbarn.
freedom with our neighbors,
Nur mit unseren Nachbarn
only
und
with our
Verbündeten
neighbors and
und
our
unseren
allies
Partnern.
and our partners.
Wir bauen auf unsere
We build
Stärke
on our strength,
unsere
our
Souveränität
sovereignty,
und unsere
and our
Fähigkeit zu
ability
gegenseitiger
to
Solidarität.
show mutual solidarity
Wir
in
tun
Europe.
es
We
mit
do this with
prinzipienfestem
realism
Realismus.
based on our principles.
Liebe Freundinnen und Freunde, wenn ich das so
Friends,
sagen darf, meine Damen und
If
Herren, 4 Punkte
I may say so,
umfasst
ladies and gentlemen,
dieses
this program
Programm der
of
Freiheit.
freedom
Erstens,
consists of 4 points.
wir stärken uns
Firstly, we are
militärisch,
strengthening
politisch,
ourselves,
wirtschaftlich und
military,
technologisch.
in military
Damit
terms, political
vermindern wir
terms,
unsere
economic
Abhängigkeiten
terms,
und
and
unsere
with
Verletzbarkeit.
technologies.
Höchste
We are
Priorität für
reducing
uns
our
hat,
dependencies and
Europa
vulnerabilities.
innerhalb der
Our highest
NATO
priority
zu
for us
stärken.
is
Wir
to
investieren
strengthen Europe
massiv
within NATO. We are making massive
glaubhafte
investments in credible deterrence.
Zur Erinnerung.
And
Deutschland
just a
hat seine
reminder,
Verfassung geändert.
Germany changed its
Beim
constitution.
Hager NATO-Gipfel im
At the
letzten
NATO
Juni haben
summit in
sich
The Hague
alle
last June,
Alliierte,
all allies,
fast alle Alliierte,
almost all allies,
verpflichtet, künftig 5%
committed
des
themselves to
Bruttoinlandproduktes in
spend
Sicherheit
5% of
zu
their
investieren.
GDP
Deutschland allein
on security.
wird in den nächsten Jahren
Germany
mehrere
alone
100
will
Milliarden Euro
invest hundreds of billions of
investieren.
euros over the coming
Wir
years.
unterstützen die
We
Ukraine in
support
ihrem
Ukraine
tapferen
in
Widerstand
its
gegen
brave
den
resistance
russischen
against
Imperialismus.
the
Wir
Russian
tun das
imperialism
diplomatisch,
in
wir tun das
military,
politisch,
in
wir
diplomatical,
tun es ökonomisch, aber
political,
wir tun es natürlich
economic
auch
terms,
militärisch.
and also in military terms.
Übrigens,
And by the way,
seit einem Jahr leisten Deutschland und
For
Europa
a year,
hier
Germany
die
and
wichtigste
Europe
Führungsarbeit.
have assumed the most
Wir haben
important
Moskau
leading role.
ungeahnte
We have
Verluste und
imposed
Kosten
unheard of losses
aufgezwungen.
and costs on Moscow.
Wenn Moskau endlich einem
And if
Frieden
Moscow
zustimmt,
finally agrees to make
dann auch
peace,
deshalb.
it will also be for
Denn
that
das ist
reason.
Ausdruck
Because this
europäischer
is an expression of European
Wir haben große
self-assertion.
konventionelle
We have
Beschaffungsvorhaben
launched big conventional
angestoßen. In der
procurement
Luftabwehr
projects in the field of
zu
air
Deep
defense,
Precision Strikes,
deep
in der
precision
Satellitentechnik.
strikes and
Wir
satellite
erwecken
technology.
unsere Verteidigungsindustrie
We are reviving
zu neuem
our
Leben.
defense
Neue
industry.
Werke eröffnen, neue
New factories
Arbeitsplätze
are
entstehen,
opening,
neue
new jobs are being
Technologien
created, new
kommen hinzu.
technologies
Der
are
bayerische
emerging.
Ministerpräsident hat es
The
gesagt, hier um
Bavarian
München herum
State
zum
Premier
Beispiel
said it.
boomt
Here in
ein
Munich, a
Cluster
cluster of
hochinnovativer
highly innovative defense
Defense-Tech-Unternehmen,
tech companies is
die
booming,
disruptive Technologien
developing
entwickeln,
disruptive
zum
technologies,
Teil
partly
in enger
in
Kooperation
close
mit der
cooperation
Ukraine.
with Ukraine.
Herr Verteidigungsminister, die Reform
The
unseres
Minister of
Wehrdienstes ist auf
Defense
den
started
Weg gebracht.
the reform of our military
Wenn es
service,
erforderlich ist,
and if necessary,
steuern wir nach.
we will adjust it further.
Wir stärken die Ostflanke
We are
der NATO.
strengthening NATO's eastern flank.
Dafür entsteht unsere Brigade in Litauen. Das
This is
erste Mal,
symbolized by our
dass
brigade
in
in
der Geschichte der
Lithuania, the
Bundeswehr
first time in the
ein
history of
ganzer
the Bundeswehr
Großverband
that
außerhalb
a
unseres
brigade
eigenen
is
Territoriums aufgestellt
is
wird.
deployed outside
Wir
our own
werden für mehr
territory.
Sicherheit
We
des hohen
will
Nordens
do
sorgen.
more for
Die ersten
securing the
deutschen
high north.
Eurofighter
The first
sind
German
gemeldet.
Eurofighters have
Und
been
es wird mehr
earmarked,
kommen.
and more is to
Die
follow.
Bundeswehr werden wir, ich habe es häufig gesagt
I
und
often
wiederhole
said
es
that, and I
hier,
will repeat it today.
schnellstmöglich zur
We will
stärksten
make the Bundeswehr the strongest
konventionellen
conventional
Armee
army in Europe
Europas machen.
as soon as we
Eine
can.
Armee, die
An army
standhält,
that stands
wenn
firm
sie
when
muss.
it has to.
Gleichzeitig machen wir
At the
unsere
same
Gesellschaft und
time,
unsere
we are
Wirtschaft
making our society and our
Wir
economy
bringen
more
neue Gesetze
resilient.
auf den Weg, unsere
We
Netze
have
und unsere
initiated
kritische
new
Infrastruktur gegen
legislation
hybride
to make our
Schläge zu
grids
härten. Wir
and
schmieden
critical infrastructure
widerstandsfähige
resilient to hybrid
Lieferketten
attacks. We are forging resilient
und
supply
bauen
chains and
einseitige
reducing
Abhängigkeiten
unilateral
von
dependencies
Rohstoffen,
on raw
Schlüsselprodukten und
materials, key
Technologien.
technologies and key products.
Unsere freiheitlich-demokratische
We
Grundordnung schützen wir gegen
protect
ihre
our
Feinde
free
im Inneren und
democratic
Äußeren.
order against
Unter
internal and
anderem
external
werden wir unsere
enemies, and among
Nachrichtendienste
other things, we will
stärken.
also strengthen our intelligence
In dieser
services.
neuen Welt
In this new
ist
world,
Wettbewerbspolitik
competitiveness policy
Sicherheitspolitik.
is security policy,
Und Sicherheitspolitik
and security policy
Wettbewerbspolitik.
is
Beides
competitiveness
dient
policy.
unserer
Both
Freiheit.
serve our freedom.
Und genau deshalb wollen wir
This
Treiber
is
des
why we want
Fortschrittes
to
in
be
den
drivers of
Zukunftstechnologien
progress
sein.
in the
Künstliche
technologies of the
Intelligenz wird
future.
dabei eine
AI will play a key
Schlüsselrolle
role in
einnehmen.
this.
Zweitens,
Secondly,
wir stärken
we're
Europa.
strengthening Europe.
Ein
A
souveränes
sovereign
Europa ist
Europe
unsere
is our
beste
best
Antwort auf die neue
answer
Zeit.
to this new era.
Europa zu einen und zu
Uniting
stärken
Europe and
ist heute
strengthening
unsere
Europe
vornehmste
is our
Aufgabe.
prime task
Unser
today.
Europa muss sich
Our
dabei auf
Europe
das
needs to
Wesentliche
focus on
konzentrieren,
what's
auf Wahrung
essential,
und Mehrung
that is
unserer
preserving
Freiheit,
and
unserer
enhancing
Sicherheit
our
und
freedom,
unserer
our security and
Wettbewerbsfähigkeit.
our competitiveness.
Den Wildwuchs europäischer
We need
Bürokratie und
to cap
Regulierung
the explosion of
müssen wir
European
beenden.
bureaucracy and regulation.
Europas Standards
European
dürfen uns nicht
standards must
Fesseln
not
anlegen,
put us
die uns
in
im Wettbewerb
chains
lähmen und behindern. Sie
that
müssen
rob us of
unsere
our
Stärken
competitiveness.
zur Geltung bringen. Sie
They
müssen
need to highlight our
Innovation
strengths.
und
They need to fuel
Unternehmertum
innovation and
befeuern,
entrepreneurship,
Investitionen ermutigen,
encourage
Kreativität
investment and
belohnen.
reward
Europa darf
creativity.
sich nicht darauf
Europe must
zurückziehen,
not just withdraw
Risiken zu
to
vermeiden.
avoiding risks.
Europa muss
It needs
Chancen
to
eröffnen
open up
und
new
Tatkraft
opportunities
entfesseln.
and unleash a new
Über diese
sense of
Fragen haben wir,
agency.
liebe Ursula von der Leyen,
Ursula
gestern
von der Leyen, we
mit den
discussed these
europäischen Staats-
questions
und
today with the
Regierungschefs
European heads of
intensiv
state and
beraten.
government.
Und daraus entwickeln wir
And
jetzt
we are
gemeinsam
developing
eine
new
gemeinsame Roadmap für ein
for
starkes
a
und
strong
souveränes Europa.
sovereign Europe.
Europa muss ein
Europe
weltpolitischer
needs to become a
Faktor werden
real
mit einer
player in
eigenen
global politics
sicherheitspolitischen
with its own
Strategie.
security
Übrigens,
policy strategy.
zur Erinnerung,
And by the way, just to remind you,
für manch einen auch, der es nicht weiß.
maybe
In
some
Artikel
people don't
42
know
des
it, Article
Vertrags über die
42
Europäische Union
of the
verpflichten
Treaty
wir
on
uns,
European Union, we
einander im
commit
Fall eines
ourselves
bewaffneten
to
Angriffs
provide
in
mutual
Europa
assistance
beizustehen.
in case of an armed
Wir
attack
müssen nun
in Europe. So we
ausbuchstabieren,
need
wie wir
to
dies
spell out now
europäisch
how we
organisieren
want to
wollen.
organize this
Nicht
at
als
the
Ersatz
European
für die
level,
NATO,
not to replace
sondern als einen
NATO,
selbsttragenden,
but as a
starken
self-sustained,
Pfeiler
strong pillar
innerhalb des
within
Bündnisses.
the alliance.
Ich habe mit dem französischen Präsidenten Emmanuel Macron erste Gespräche über
I have
europäische
started
nukleare
first talks with the French President
Abschreckung
Emmanuel Macron about
Meine Damen und Herren, damit das klar ist,
European nuclear deterrence. And
wir
ladies and
halten
gentlemen, to be
uns
clear,
dabei an unsere
we
rechtlichen
absolutely
Verpflichtungen.
stick to our
Wir
legal
denken dies
obligations.
strikt eingebettet
this will be fully embedded in our nuclear sharing within NATO, and we will not have zones of different security levels in Europe.
Und die europäische Verteidigungsindustrie,
and the European defense
sie muss
industry,
schließlich ihre Pferde stärken auf die Straße
finally needs
bringen.
to show its mettle.
3 große S
three big S's: standardization, scaling, and simplification of weapon systems will have to be organized in a European framework. We are tapping a huge potential by doing so. And we are translating this power into a joint external positioning that gains us new partners. Part of this is a strong trade policy. The EU-Mercosur agreement will be provisionally applied. Yes, this is the right decision taken by the EU Commission. The free trade agreement with India has been fully negotiated, and we will and have to have additional agreements. Diplomatically, we in Europe are truly squaring the circle these days. It is reflected also in our work for peace in Ukraine. When we need to be agile, we made progress in small groups with the E3, that is Germany, France, and the UK, but also with Italy and Poland as big European players. We know in the long run, we will only be successful if we take the other Europeans on board, and we're doing that. For us Germans, there's no way around it. We are at the heart of Europe. If Europe is torn apart, we are torn apart. Germany is torn apart. But I would also like to appeal to our partners. Please realize the impact of the moment, and please also engage in a path towards a strong, sovereign Europe. And thirdly, we want to forge a new transatlantic partnership, and let me start with the inconvenient truth right from the start. A divide has opened up between Europe and the United States, and Vice President J.D. Vance said this very openly here at the Munich Security Conference a year ago, and he was right. The battle of cultures of MAGA in the US is not ours. Freedom of speech here ends where the words spoken are directed against human dignity and our basic laws. We do not believe in tariffs and protectionism, but in free trade.
Und an Klimaabkommen und Weltgesundheitsorganisation halten wir fest, weil wir überzeugt sind. Weil wir überzeugt sind, globale Aufgaben werden wir nur gemeinsam lösen. Nun hat die transatlantische Partnerschaft offenbar ihre Selbstverständlichkeit verloren. Erst in den Vereinigten Staaten, dann auch hier in Europa und vermutlich auch hier im Saal. Meine Damen und Herren, wenn unsere Partnerschaft eine Zukunft haben soll, dann müssen wir sie im doppelten Sinn neu begründen. Diese Begründung muss handfest sein, nicht esoterisch. Wir müssen diesseits und jenseits des Atlantiks zu dem Schluss kommen, zusammen sind wir stärker. Wir Europäer wissen, wie kostbar das Vertrauen ist, auf dem die NATO gründet. Im Zeitalter der Großmächte werden auch die USA auf dieses Vertrauen angewiesen sein. Selbst sie stoßen an die Grenzen der eigenen Macht, wenn sie etwa im Alleingang unterwegs sind. Den Strategen im Pentagon jedenfalls scheint das klar zu sein. Die NATO ist nicht nur unser, sondern, liebe amerikanische Freunde, auch euer Wettbewerbsvorteil. Let me paraphrase this for our American friends in English. For 3 generations, trust amongst allies, partners and friends has made NATO the strongest alliance of all times. Europe knows deeply how precious this is. In the era of great power rivalry, even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone. Dear friends, being a part of NATO is not only Europe's competitive advantage, it's also the United States' competitive advantage. So let's repair and revive transatlantic trust together. We, the Europeans, we are doing our part. Und ich möchte den Satz aufgreifen, den Wolfgang Ischinger gesprochen hat. Autokratien mögen Gefolgschaft haben. Demokratien haben Partner und Verbündete. Dieser Satz ist übrigens auch richtig für uns Europäer. Ein wahrer Verbündeter nimmt seine Verpflichtungen ernst. Niemand hat uns in die übermäßige Abhängigkeit von den Vereinigten Staaten gezwungen, in der wir uns zuletzt befunden haben. Diese Unmündigkeit war selbstverschuldet. Aber diesen Zustand lassen wir jetzt hinter uns. Und zwar lieber heute als morgen. Das tun wir nicht, indem wir die NATO abschreiben. Wir tun es, indem wir im Bündnis, im eigenen Interesse, einen starken, selbsttragenden europäischen Pfeiler errichten. Und dieser Aufbruch, meine Damen und Herren, ist unter allen Umständen richtig. Er ist richtig, falls sich die Vereinigten Staaten weiter entfernen. Er ist richtig, solange wir unsere Sicherheit nicht aus eigener Kraft gewährleisten können. Und er ist schließlich auch dann richtig, um eine gesündere transatlantische Partnerschaft neu zu bekommen. Ich vermute dabei, dass wir in Zukunft häufiger als in der Vergangenheit unterschiedlicher Meinung sein werden. Wir werden öfter über den richtigen Weg verhandeln und vielleicht sogar streiten müssen. Wenn wir das mit neuer Stärke, neuer Achtung und Selbstachtung tun, dann ist es zum Vorteil beider Seiten. Und etwas davon habe ich in den Gesprächen über Grönland gespürt, die wir in den letzten Wochen geführt haben. Und ich wende mich insbesondere an Mette Frederiksen, die dänische Ministerpräsidentin. Die weiß, dass sie sich auf europäische Solidarität ohne jede Einschränkung verlassen kann. Wir knüpfen viertens und last but not least ein starkes Netz globaler Partnerschaften. So wichtig europäische Integration und transatlantische Partnerschaft für uns bleiben, sie werden nicht mehr hinreichen, um unsere Freiheit zu bewahren. Partnerschaft ist dabei kein absoluter Begriff. Partnerschaft setzt keine vollkommene Übereinstimmung aller Werte und Interessen voraus. Das gehört übrigens zu den Lehren dieser Tage, Wochen und Monate. So nähern wir uns neuen Partnern, mit denen uns nicht alle, aber doch wichtige Anliegen verbinden. Das vermeidet Abhängigkeiten und Risiken und es eröffnet zugleich Möglichkeiten und Chancen für beide Seiten. Es schützt unsere Freiheit. Kanada und Japan, die Türkei, Indien, Brasilien werden dabei eine Schlüsselrolle spielen. Auch Südafrika, die Golfstaaten und andere. Wir wollen mit diesen Staaten enger zusammenrücken in gegenseitigem Respekt und mit langem Atem. Wir teilen das grundlegende Interesse an einer politischen Ordnung, in der wir auf Verabredungen und Vertrauen können, in der wir zur gemeinsamen Bewältigung globaler Probleme imstande sind und in der wir vor allem Konflikte miteinander friedlich ausräumen. Wir teilen die Erfahrung, dass Völkerrecht und internationale Organisationen unserer Souveränität, unserer Unabhängigkeit und eben und auch unserer Freiheit dienen. Wir Deutsche wissen, eine Welt, in der nur Macht zählt, wäre ein finsterer Ort. Unser Land ist diesen Weg im 20. Jahrhundert bis zum bitteren und bösen Ende gegangen. Heute schlagen wir einen anderen, einen besseren Weg ein. Unsere größte Stärke bleibt die Fähigkeit, Partnerschaften, Bündnisse und Organisationen zu bauen, die auf Recht und Regeln fußen, die auf Respekt und Vertrauen gründen und die an die Kraft der Freiheit glauben. Nach 1945 waren es vor allem unsere amerikanischen Freunde, die uns Deutsche für diesen starken und hellen Gedanken begeistert haben. Das vergessen wir euch nicht. Auf diesem Fundament ist die NATO zum stärksten politischen Bündnis der Geschichte geworden. Wir bleiben dieser Idee treu. Mit aller Kraft und Leidenschaft, mit Anstand und Solidarität, mit Kreativität und mit Mut übertragen wir diese Idee in die neue Zeit, damit diese Zeit nicht finster wird, sondern,
not
meine
dark,
Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen,
eine gute Zeit.
but bright, a
Für
great
uns,
time for
aber
us,
vor allem
but
für die
especially
Generation
for the
unserer
generations
Kinder
of our
und
children
Enkelkinder,
and grandchildren
die sich darauf verlässt, dass wir in
who
diesen
rely
Tagen und Wochen
on us in
das
these
Richtige
weeks and months
tun.
to do the right
Wir
thing,
sind dazu
and we are
entschlossen.
determined to do that.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Merz. We have only a few minutes for just a couple of questions, and I will use my role here to throw the first question at you. I'd like to ask a question about our relationship with Russia. The discussions which are currently being conducted with Russia about the future of Ukraine are being conducted essentially exclusively by our American friends. Your colleague Emmanuel Macron has recently expressed himself in favor of a direct European channel of communications with the Kremlin. You have expressed, if I can put it that way, doubts about the usefulness of that. But isn't it, when we think and we talk about European sovereignty, isn't it something that we should somehow try to manage better and not leave this only to our American friends? Give us your views.
Wolfgang, many thanks for this important question. And this is a question we ask ourselves almost every week and every month. My first remark is that we are closely linked to those who are talking with the Russian side, be it the United States of America or be it Ukraine itself. We are well coordinated, and there is nothing which is not negotiated, at least talked about with both sides before. My second remark is the following. There was somebody from the European Union, a prime minister, who traveled to Moscow on his own. This is almost 2 years ago. He had no mandate. He went there. He achieved nothing. And the week after, we saw the heaviest attacks on civil infrastructure, on private homes, on hospitals we had ever seen until this time. So if it makes sense to talk, we are willing to talk. But as you can see with the American side, Russia is not yet willing to talk seriously. And my personal guess is, this is my personal view, that this war will only end when Russia is at least economically, potentially militarily exhausted. We are approaching this time, but we are approaching this time. And I said that in my speech, that we did a lot to achieve that, but we are not yet there. Russia has to give up this terrible war against Ukraine. And we have to do everything what is needed to bring them to the point where they see no further advantages for them to continue this terrible war. We are not yet there, but look, this war is now lasting longer than the Second World War. It's terrible. Russia has it in its hand to stop it. But we have it in our hand, and this is America and Europe and Ukraine together, to bring them to this point, to stop it. And we have to do everything what is possible in our hands to do that, militarily, economically, politically, diplomatically, whatever. And if it makes sense to talk, we are ready to talk, but they have to concede that they are really willing to talk about a ceasefire and then about a peace plan.
Thank you. We have time for one or two questions from the audience. Who will pose the first question? Please, where's the microphone? Microphone. Gentleman in the second row. Please be kind enough to identify yourself.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I'm the President of Montenegro. Dear Chancellor, I do want to ask you, what do you think, what is in your opinion the baseline scenario about the dynamics of the EU accession? You know that Montenegro is one of 10 candidate countries that are currently interested to join the club. And do you believe that also the enlargement of the Union is another part of making Europe more competitive on the world stage? Thank you very much.
Definitely, the answer is yes. And Ursula von der Leyen and myself, we are completely agreeing on that. We have promised the accession to become member of the European Union to many countries, especially in your region. And we had our meeting in December with the West Balkan states and the European Council in Brussels. And frankly, I'm feeling more and more uncomfortable with our approach to your countries. We have to reopen a new strategy, how to bring these countries closer to the European Union. I don't want to lose you. You are part of the European continent, and therefore you are potentially part of the European Union. And I know that this is a consensus. There is an elephant in the room. Everybody knows that here in this room, who is against it. But we have to overcome that. This is, until now, it's unanimous vote in the European Council to open the next chapter. But we have to overcome that. And the latest after the elections, which will take in April, hopefully we will be able to open the next chapters and to bring you closer and closer to the European Union at the very end as members.
Chancellor Merz, thank you so much. I think you succeeded in setting the tone for the 62nd Munich Security Conference. Thank you very much. Let's give him a round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The program will continue in just a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue in just a minute. Please remain seated.
Needs to be maintained, and that can only happen if we stabilize the situation in Gaza, because there's no linkage with a space that is currently in chaos. So we have a lot more to do. We have a meeting coming up, and I'm sure we'll hear more about what's being done. It's a daily effort to stabilize the situation. All the hostages are out now, so now the focus needs to be getting the lives of the Palestinians in Gaza into a much, much better place, and allowing that then to be the opening towards a pathway towards the Palestinians and the Israelis can live together side by side in peace and in harmony.
And I just would add very quickly, we've had over 4,000 trucks per week moving now since the Sharm el-Sheikh. Number one, it's not enough, but it is exponentially more than it was. And as the minister pointed out, there was language in the peace plan that is now in the Security Council resolution, post-reform towards Palestinian self-determination, and no occupation, no annexation of Gaza, which again, I would argue forcefully that only President Trump could bring all sides, including the Israelis, to the table to get this far. A long way to go, but we are far better than where we were in September of last year.
Thank you. There are a lot of hands going up. Question here, very briefly.
Very briefly. Katarzyna Pisarska, I'm the chair of the Warsaw Security Forum, Poland. My question to you, Ambassador Waltz, just an honest reply, please. Does America...
I've been pretty straightforward and honest so far.
Does America need a rules-based order? And if so, what are you willing to also sacrifice, because you have been backing this world order for years and years. And thanks to the United States of America, many of us, including Poland, has benefited immensely. And what we're seeing now is a withdrawal. That's an honest, I think, assessment of many of us. And we just ask ourselves, are you willing to fight with us, the Europeans and others, for this world order? And the same question really to Kaja Kallas. Do you feel that the Europeans are willing to really fight for this order?
Thank you.
And I would follow your question. Are the Europeans willing and able to take the tough financial steps necessary? I'm a recovering politician myself. I know how tough those votes are when you have a social support system. But look, to answer your question directly, absolutely. The American people have underwritten with their hard-earned dollar the global multilateral rules-based order since World War II. However, with $37 trillion in debt and counting, the massive debt load that the Western world is facing, I think it is fair on their behalf to ask 450 million Europeans with the same size economy as the United States to be more self-sustaining in their own defense. And it astounds me why that is so controversial it is...
Ambassador, I think it's not.
It's a fair question. When I go to people in Indiana and Georgia and North Florida that I represented, and it is their money paying more than 180 countries combined into the UN system, it's fair to say, yes, I have to look at them honestly and say it's being well spent, and it's not.
Absolutely. And indeed, I think as Chancellor Merz made very clear, the Europeans have belatedly got the message. And there is a recognition that, defense spending has gone up and is going to go up further. Europe needs to get his act together, and I'm going to come to Kaja Kallas again. There's an absolute, that was very clear in Chancellor.
But it wasn't clear in 2014. Why not?
It was, it took,
we're acting as though things were coming unglued now. It's been coming unglued for 10 years, and no one was responding in an effective way. Now we're asking more forcefully.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing a good result as a result of the 5%.
That was being asked from the audience was, if the Europeans are responding now, do you still believe in multilateralism in this order? Do you still believe in it? Or, as Chancellor Merz said, he said, and I just wrote it down, even the US is reaching the limits of its own power if it goes alone. Do you agree with him that the US could not go alone?
I'm looking at the grouping I just discussed of our Gulf Arab allies. I'm looking at the Abraham Accords. I'm looking at the fact that the president didn't need to take on Azerbaijan, Armenia, and he did. He didn't need to take on Pakistan and India, and he did. And we're asking the rest of the world to be there with us in a fair way financially. Because there is a cost to the status quo, and the status quo was not sustainable anymore. And that's, I think, on behalf of our constituents, a fair question to ask.
Kaja, how do you respond to that? It's a reasonable point, surely.
No, of course it is. But if you look at also to the United Nations and all the contributions, then when it comes to the development aid, Europe is doing the biggest share. So I don't really buy this argument that we are not doing anything. In the beginning, you said also that is it that actually the rules of jungle and the might makes right actually has always been there? And one might say that is true, that those who have the power have had different rules. But even in jungle, animals cooperate, and so you are better off when you work with others. And if you think, in the global, if we take the superpowers, what is actually the difference? When for example, Russia goes to war, they go alone because they don't have allies. When America goes to wars, then a lot of us go with you, and we lose our people on the way. So that means that you also need us in your. To be this superpower, because if you look at the bigger picture, I mean, in terms of economic might, China is a very, very powerful country. In terms of military might as well. So what is the difference between you and the other superpowers so far is the allies. So, but I'm coming to this point that, of course, we are willing to fight for the world where there are some kind of rules, because majority, or actually all the European countries are small countries, or those who haven't realized that they are small countries yet. But we are small countries, so we need a rules-based order. And it is clear that the current rules-based order, it has been put in place after the Second World War, considering all what was happening there, what were the powers fighting then, and it doesn't serve the world right now. But what serves the world is, the rules really that are, protecting everybody, so that, nobody is above the law. And I think that is the difference, that we actually want partnerships that are based on dignity, where we actually listen to the other party and we care also what the other countries are thinking about. So it's not like, we make decisions in this, Board of Peace Charter, for example, that, you don't have to actually take into account anybody who is on that organization, because one person can make the decisions. And that is, I think, the difference how we see the world. Because if countries are treated equally, I think there's also less chance for war and tyranny.
So I realize that I have completely failed to instill a rules-based order here, because this conversation has been wholly dominated by the two biggest economic and political blocs. But we're also running out of time. I'm very sorry, but I wanted to end by giving all four of you a chance, and I'm going to start with you, Prince Faisal. I'm going to ask you one question, and then you can offer me one reason for optimism. I'm sorry, I can't get to all the questions. I'm very sorry. I'm sure you'll have another chance to come back to this in a different panel. I'm very, very sorry. The question is, do you think this world that we are going to go into is going to be more dangerous or not than the world that came before? And secondly, what's the one thing that you would advise us all to focus on to ensure that it was not more dangerous?
I think in the interim, yes, just because we are in a transition period between the system that was and the system that probably will be. And that has significant risks. I think economic disparity and inequality, especially as will be created by technological advancements, are a significant risk factor that are also going to impact us, but that over time may actually deliver significant benefits after a period of dislocation. So, yes, to the first question, I think we are entering a significant risk period. You asked me to kind of end on an optimistic note. The conversation we just had actually is why I'm a bit optimistic, because finally we are being, all of us, honest with each other. We don't agree yet, but we're actually having the conversation. Everybody is saying how they really feel about the system and how it didn't work from their perspective. We heard from the US that the burden sharing wasn't fair. We hear from the Europeans, you've heard from us in the developing world. We are finally actually having these conversations in a way that removes the edifice and talks about what's really the case. It'll take us some time to actually get to a point where we agree on what the future system is going to look like, and how the burden sharing is going to work, and how equality of states, even though there is a disparity in interests and in capacity, is going to be addressed. But I think over time, with some pain, as I mentioned, there will be some pain in the process of getting there. I think we will be in a better world.
So I am going to end us there on that optimistic note. A spirited conversation. Thank you all. Thank you, Minister Sanchez. Thank you, the rest of you. And now on to the next panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program in the conference hall will continue at 3:30 p.m. with the session Terrifying Times, Managing the Weaponization of Trade. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue here at 5:30 sharp.
States, it's not China, it's just us deciding if we go this way. But we can really be a power in the international system. And the second point is, and I really want to underline, when it comes to Global South, I think Mercosur is very important. India, the trade deals are very important. But there are so many countries in the world that wants to work together with us in Europe. And I know that from a lot of trips I made as a party leader or now as the Vice Chancellor and Minister of Finance, if you come to several states in Africa, in Latin America, also in Asia, everyone is telling us, okay, Russia was here, China's here, they're doing deals, where are the Europeans? And I think this is what we have to recognize, that we have to become stronger when it comes to make trade deals, fair trade deals with the Global South. And so we can bring these countries in a stronger relationship with Europe. And then I also want to underline that we have to reform the institutions. I mean, everything is about international institutions, it's about rules-based institutions, it's about common policy, but we have to talk about the representation of the Global South in these institutions. And I think if this debate is starting from Europe, we can also build trust with our partners in the Global South and all of this. And again, I want to thank you for your clear statement for the transatlantic partnership. But we have to face the situation as it is. We have a president in the White House that is having threats with tariffs, and we have a competitor with China who's doing an unfair trade relationship with us when it comes to subsidies from the state, when it comes to overcapacities, when we see how China is flooding the European market. So we have to be stronger also on trade policy, but I think for Europe there are a lot of opportunities and I think we should use them.
Director General, did you want to jump in on that? It seems like they're following your message immediately about agency.
Sounds great. No, just a couple of numbers on this. Although many people, this definition of Global South and Global North is also, we need to just also be careful about it because there are a lot of differences. But taking it as it is, in 1995, the Global North or developed countries contributed 60% of world GDP and the Global South 40%. Today, those numbers are reversed. It is now the Global South contributes 60% of global GDP and the North 40%. In 1995, 10%, South-South trade was 10% of world trade. Today it's 25%. So there are shifts and movements that dictate that, yes, We need to look at those. We need to pay attention. And the third point I wanted to make on that is that, look, the arrangements with, whether it's global south, south-south trade or north-south trade, or arrangements with the global south, this is all part of trying to diversify trade. And that is why at the WTO we do support these trade arrangements, whether it's the EU-Mercosur that took 24 years and other trade arrangements. We support them because they help diversification of trade away from US, which were, you know, so many countries were overly dependent on the US for demand and overly dependent on China for critical supplies. So I think diversifying away from both of these and giving yourself the flexibility is a good thing. And if it's with the global south, why not?
And of course, the White House's policies have accelerated that process. I want to go to the audience now to take a few questions. If you can raise your hand, and we'll have a microphone weave its way over to you. I see in row 3 we have a lady. If you can identify yourself, ma'am, and then a question, not a comment, please.
Thank you. My name is Tytti Tuppurainen. I'm a member of the Finnish Parliament. I really like what the Director General said about the rest should unite. I think that's really the right way to go. But that brings us to the question of how to engage with China. And I think it needs regulation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on the equal footing with China. We need to regulate. How does it fit together with the growing sentiment of deregulation in our countries, especially here in Europe, but also in the United States? Deregulation, but the need to regulate. How do you see that?
Well, I think that China believes or wants to support and says it wants to support the multilateral trading system because it has benefited quite a bit from it. China recognizes, or at least we are passing the message, that the export-led growth model that drove China's growth for the past 40 years cannot drive China's growth for the next 40. And the $1.2 trillion trade surplus is not sustainable because the rest of the world cannot absorb it. So these are the messages we are passing to China. So China needs to act. And with the trade with China having dropped, trade between China and the US having dropped 20% last year, the trade is flowing to other places. Europe, 8%. Africa is actually getting the largest flows, 26%. ASEAN, 13%. Latin America, 8%. So it's going everywhere. And if China does not act, we will see more barriers. So what we're saying is within the WTO rules, there are tools. They are not perfect, but there are tools that can be used to deal with this. The EU knows that also, or the EC, and they're bringing some of it. So I'm not sure it's your regulation. I wouldn't say more regulation. I think it's dialogue. I think it's agreements with China, plus using some of the multilateral tools at hand.
I'm going to take maybe a couple of questions together. They are both in the front row, as it were, and then I promised to diversify a little bit. If we can get a microphone out here. There's a gentleman here, right in front of me, and then the lady in the front.
Hi, Michał Baranowski. I'm a Deputy Minister of Economy in Poland, responsible for trade, so very much the front seat of the current debate. One question, perhaps to the Senator, is, if we were not focused so much on each other transatlantically, we would be talking about overcapacities in third countries, China specifically. Do you see an appetite, because we are not seeing it as much on the executive, in the US to engage in this? And if I may, to President of Finland, to what extent are you concerned, and how do we address the dilemmas of sometimes having trade and security issues being touched very closely also by our closest allies? Thanks.
Those are great questions. Do you mind holding on to those in your heads? And we'll just take one more question here. Ma'am, I think we have a microphone right there. Yes, go for it.
Hello, thank you. Alicia Batsman, Ukrainian media, Gordon, editor-in-chief. I have one short question for Mr. President. Based on Finland's historical experience, please give Ukraine a recipe how we can defeat Russia and Putin.
All right, thank you. I will just point out, we're here to talk about tariffs today, but I'm going to allow it a little bit of divergence. Gentlemen, quick answers, please.
Well, in my case on trade, I think that it was announced on April the 2nd, not the 1st, because we all know April the 1st is April Fool's Day.
No, it's my birthday.
Yeah.
It's a very nice day.
But I went into my office when I saw the announcement, and I told my staff, if the rest of our Western allies are smart, they will have a multilateral coordinated response. They will de-risk. They will build trading blocks. And frankly, I think all of that is healthy. Because, in some respects, I play a lot of different kind of sports. I love mountain biking. And I only get faster if I have somebody riding on my heels or that I've got to catch up with. And quite honestly, I think we've lost that spirit of, I'll call it not competition, but co-opetition, that comes through having a multilateral bloc that is at a more level playing field when the United States decides to make moves like this in the future. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it makes us better if we do it right. But China is loving this discussion right now. China is loving the fact that we're imposing tariffs on countries that we have complex relationships with, that need some forgiveness on the part of the United States, because it's more than just about the economic relationship. It's more about helping them develop. It's more about checking China and Russia's malign influence in areas of the world, think Africa and think South America. So anybody who's advising the president thinking that our spreadsheets all need to tally on some nation that's just barely developing in a young democracy or maybe a benevolent dictatorship misses the history lesson. We have to be present. When we have a discussion about how China plays into the role of Western nations, I think about their metastasizing again and NATO allies with Huawei. We all remember the argument about how we had to Huawei from our NATO allies so our communications infrastructure is solid. Let's not repeat that mistake. But at the same time, we've got to recognize that co-opetition is good. I'm not the least bit frightened by a well-defined multilateral response to the U.S. so that we understand our limits and we build on that.
All right. President Chib, go ahead with the trade answer. Maybe a super short. I know you've spoken about Ukraine extensively in other forums, so I'll leave you to a quick one there.
I can't hesitate because Tom talked about Huawei and we're in Germany. You can always switch from Huawei to Nokia. It's a really safe network, and it works really well.
Never miss an opportunity.
I never do. On the trade issue, a very short answer because I think it's linked to the fundamentals of our transatlantic partnership. You will know that I'm pro-European, pro-American, and therefore, like Peter sitting next to you, by definition, pro-transatlanticist. I think there's a lot of noise in the transatlantic relationship right now. I think an element that Tom was bringing forward is correct. We need to take more responsibility when it comes to security. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there are issues with where we can work with the Americans, NATO, defense, technology, minerals. In our case, actually, icebreakers. There's a dependency in the other way. So there are a lot of things that we can do. And then let's cordially disagree on things that are linked to the EU or international institutions, the liberal world order, and climate change. Then on Ukraine, I promised to bring in the tariffs on this. Very briefly, I'm not going to give you advice, but I think you're winning this war. And the reason I say this is that Putin has failed strategically. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian. It became European. He wanted to prevent the enlargement of NATO. He got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep our defense expenditure down, and it's now going up to 5%. Secondly, he's losing on the military front. Remember that when the war began, Russia acquired 12% of Ukrainian territory. That's 12 years ago. Since then, 8%. In the past 2 years, 1%. In December, Ukraine was able to kill 34,000 Russian soldiers. They were not able to recruit back. So my answer is, just keep on what you're doing, and at the end of the day, you will prevail and win this war.
All right. We have just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to take a couple more questions on tariffs, please. Row 3, I see Natalie Tocci. If we can get a microphone over to her. And then there's one hand at the back. You know who you are. Yes.
Question to President Stubb. So earlier you juxtaposed a multilateral and a multipolar system. And that resonates, of course. Although I'm wondering whether the two models that we have before us, and of course I'm slightly simplifying here, is on the one hand a rules-based multipolarity, which I guess kind of fits into your principled realism, and on the other hand, a model of imperial collusion. Where obviously there are wannabe empires from Russia to China to the United States. And of course, you know, those empires eventually could end up being rivals and compete and maybe even conflict. But for the time being, they seem to be more interested in establishing their spheres of influences, be it through security, be it through economic coercion. So if that's the alternative model, how is it that both we as Europeans, but in general, the multilateral system, can act to prevent that scenario?
Okay, President Stubb, just hold on to that one. And there was one last question there. I think that's Dan Dresner.
It is. Thank you very much. Dan Dresner from the Fletcher School. My question is about the intersection of security and trade, which all of you seem to acknowledge is certainly an important issue. I guess on the transatlantic relationship, then, to what extent does this mean, President Stubb, that Europe, in terms of building out, using the 5% of its GDP to spend on defense, should actually de-link from buying U.S. weapons and start developing its own military-industrial complex? And to Senator Tillis, what are the implications of that for the United States?
Okay, President Stubb, take it away.
I'm just fresh out of a meeting with the CEO of Lockheed, who we just purchased. We just bought 64 F-35s. So am I the right person to answer the question? But I'll go to Natalie first. I think you're onto something on this. My answer is to say that there are countries that would like to go back to the 19th century, concert of powers and spheres of interests. And you could certainly say that, you know, Russia has been there, China to a certain extent, and one could argue that perhaps the U.S. administration as well. Now, what do we then need to do? I think then we come back to Ngosi's point and to Mark Carney's point. I think the middle powers need to come together and hedge their bets into multilateralism. I was at the G20 meeting in Johannesburg, and I felt that 18 out of the 20 Gs felt very strongly about multilateralism. What do? We need to change the power structure. So therefore, double the number of countries in the UN Security Council. Get one from Latin America, two from Africa, and 2 from Asia. Think about what Europe should do with its position in the UN Security Council. So this is just a beginning. So when you give agency, they start working with it. Then we come to the question of de-risking from US defense. I don't think this is a binary issue, purely black and white. What we'll see is still a lot of presence of American defense industry. Why? Because it's so extremely good on, for instance, F-35s or on long-range missiles. But what you'll also see now is Europe coming forward with different types of plans of bringing their own defense industry together. I look at a country like Finland. We have an extremely good space cluster. I look at countries like Sweden and Norway. They have strong defense industries. So it's not going to be a decoupling because we need each other and we trust each other. Again, I come back to the point that trade, security, and the transatlantic partnership, it has worked before, and I don't see any reason why it should not work in the future. We just have to get this right, be a little bit more cool, calm, and collected.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is that decoupling only benefits our would-be adversaries. It makes no sense. What we have to do, but again, I hate to go back to it, but I must. a $2 trillion shortfall in the prior commitment for NATO allies over 20 years. If we had those demand signals and all the modernization, the things that could have come with it, what would the supply chains look like today? I was a partner at Price Waterhouse in the supply chain practice. You never put all of your links into the same jurisdiction. We need to figure out how to better integrate, find best in class. If somebody comes up with a platform that's more impressive than the F-35, that, by the way, Mr. President, is why I said y'all were a badass country, because on a per capita basis, we would have to have 10 times, 20 times more to match your per capita representation. We find best practices, we build on them, but we build resilient supply chains that are ready for hopefully a conflict that never occurs. And I think we're exposed right now. So instead of competing, let's figure out how we can actually create synergy by working together. I don't think you put your eggs in any one basket. I'm clearly, unapologetically pro-American and pro-innovation, but I think the best innovation comes from having tighter alliances, because the deeper our economic alliances and strategic alliances go, the further our relationships and alliances will go over time.
We're almost out of time. I'm going to take one very quick last question from Mike Froman, sitting right here. In row 4, the mic is making it over to you. A quick one, please.
I think one of the challenges of this conversation is how it relates to the actual power in the world. You get the United States and China basically following their own set of rules. It's hard to imagine China agreeing to the kind of reforms you'd want to see in the WTO to deal with the challenges of the Chinese economic system. It's hard to see the United States agreeing to change governance in the institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and the UN Security Council. How do you address your agenda that's been laid out here in the context of actually how power is allocated in the world right now?
Director General, I'll just give you a very quick last word on this.
Never say never. China has benefited from the multilateral system. It just got out of special and differential treatment after many years of resisting. There's something at the WTO, sorry, if you call yourself a developing country, which China does, and by the way, they didn't invent it. I found an institution in which any member can define themselves the way they want, something which is strange. Now, they call themselves a developing country, but at the WTO, if you do that, it entitles you to implement agreements with a longer period of time to get exemptions and other benefits. One of the things the US really didn't like, and they were right, because it was stopping poor countries from really benefiting, is China benefiting. So we worked hard to get China, and they withdrew from special and differential treatment. No one thought they would do it. So I had a boss who used to tell me, Jim Wolfenson, if someone opens the door a crack, put your foot in and push. Maybe the crack will widen, and maybe it won't. Let's not give up on China doing reforms until we try it, and then they say we're absolutely not going to do it. Will it be easy? No. But let's not give up before trying.
Let's bottle up that enthusiasm and optimism and thank our panel, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, President Stubb, Vice Chancellor Kingbell, and Senator Tillis. Thank you so much for being here.